So I've told some of you, and if you haven't heard my story about the spaceship in my closet, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. Today, our service is about space and imagination and our ability to think beyond our current circumstances. When I was little and was having difficult times, as children do or people do, I had to share a room with my older sister, which I love her dearly now, but as children we fought like cats and dogs. And so she would often tack a sheet between our beds, in the middle of the night, no less. This is my side of the room, and this is your side of the room. And so when I got my very own room, it was actually strange. And when my brother went to college, I took over his room, and it had one of those bifold closets. And when I was little, we had mini pages, which were in the newspaper, and they had things like something about Mars or something about Jupiter, and they would have pictures. And also we would get those publishers clearing stake letters with little stickers, and my mom would give those to me, and I would I created a spaceship in my closet with all my stuffed animals, and I had a sleeping bag, and I would have the best time in there. My mom would look for me, and she eventually figured out it was in my closet. So coming out of the closet was a whole thing for me. But it also involves space. And so when you think about the power of imagination to help us get through hard times or to move beyond the status quo, it's incredibly powerful. And to have examples that provide us with the way forward is so important. I didn't have a lot of scientific or math examples, and often when I was young, I would always say, oh, I'm not very good at math. And it really took me until I was an adult to understand that I could be creative and also be okay at math. And so I think it's all those things. So I was reading an NPR article that lifted me into the imagination of space and reality. No matter what you're doing right now, sitting, standing, walking, you're moving. Specifically, you're moving in at least 4 different ways. First, the Earth is spinning on its axis at about 1,000 miles per hour right now, or 16 kilometers per hour. This rotation is the reason why we have days. Second, Earth and other planets in our solar system are orbiting the sun. Our planet does that at around 67 miles per hour. That's why we have years. And third, you're moving around the sun, and the rest of our solar system is orbiting around the center of our Milky Way at over 500,000 miles per hour. You think you're speeding when you go 80, but hey, that's pretty good. On this little blue spinning planet, in the middle of vast space, we are part of a cosmic dance. And so when you are caught feeling stuck or feeling just overwhelmed, think about the vast distance, the vast possibility, the beauty that we are getting from all these images coming back to us right now from the far reaches of our solar system. And some of the biggest stories that we've chewed on as humans are, how did life begin on Earth? Does life exist beyond our home planet? How do we search for it? Since we've sat beside campfires and since we launched the first Mars rover, we keep peering into the deep to search for the unknown. Are there beings out there wondering if we exist? Is there an entire universe of life that we have yet to discover? When I watched Star Trek when I was little, I remember thinking that I couldn't believe this was allowed on television. Because they had, I grew up in the Bible Belt, and they had these beings that Captain Kirk and Spock encountered that were like gods. And so I thought, oh, they encountered the Greek gods. But it turned out they were just people or robots. I can't remember the plot. But, but I kept thinking, when we meet life, will we know what it is? For thinking about, our experience, and if someone from the early 1900s was dropped into the 21st century, what would they think was happening? It's just very interesting to think about the mystery and the surprise that we all might have. Or is life microscopic? Can we see things at a very small level? And they've already discovered signs of life on Mars and perhaps Europa, the moon around Jupiter. And we think about the stories that we tell ourselves about the world we live in, what is possible or not. It makes a difference. If a child sees themselves in roles and positions of power, they can believe that they too can achieve that goal. The era of women in space began on June 16th, 1963. Does anyone remember which country had the first woman in space? Yeah, it was Soviet Union. The Soviet cosmonaut Valentina Tereshkova launched aboard the Vostok 6 spacecraft, and that was 1963. And as of March 2023, 72 women have flown in space. And of those, 44 worked on the International Space Station and as visitors on space shuttle assembly flights. And yet, when I was recently reading a book called Her Space, Her Time, and we were asked to think about female scientists, it was really hard for people to think about that. Often people say, Madame Curie, but there are so many, and so many. When I took Kendra and Aaron, when they were little, we were visiting Alita in Florida, and Alita's my mother-in-law, and we went to the space station and we had the lunch with an astronaut, which was really cool because it was a female astronaut. And so I think I was probably more excited just to hear what her life was like on the space station, and just to think about the role models that we have, when we have a trans astronaut, or, having people that represent who we are is important. Once upon a time, in ancient Greece, in the town of Delphi, on the slopes of Parnassus, there stood a temple. There was a temple to the god Apollo. The ancient Greeks believed in many gods who had different responsibilities. Apollo was the god of the sun, of music and dance, and of healing. The temple of Apollo at Delphi was very important because of the high priest Pythia, who served as an oracle or a prophet. And now we go back to ancient times. Is it science? Is it mystery? Is it both? Greek leaders would travel from all over for the oracle's wisdom. The Oracle of Delphi was one of the most prestigious oracles among the Greeks. She was also among the most powerful women in the classical world. She would breathe sweet-smelling vapors from a crack in the rock in the temple. These vapors would send her into a state. She would channel the god Apollo and babble out what she received while another priest would translate. And to them, it was a miracle. Usually when we hear the phrase, once upon a time, we're ready to hear a story of make-believe. This is not one of those times. The story of the oracle is real. The temple on the slopes of Parnassus is real, and the priest was real. Even the vapors were real, really. In 2000, geologists continue to think about the oracle and those sweet-smelling vapors, and they studied what would those vapors come from. The rocks of the temple lay on the ground of the earth. Could it be coming from there? And after more investigation and research, they discovered that there was a geological fault passing through Delphi and on the slopes of Parnassus, and through the sanctuary of the Temple of Apollo. There were two tectonic plates on the Earth's surface, and sometimes the movement of those plates would heat up gas deep underground and it would come right into the nostrils of Pythia. So it was science, right? That's an easy way to end the story. It was just science, those silly Greeks, but that's not the end of the story. The scientific answer does not mean that the Greeks were foolish because they had a relationship with their deity. The scientific reason does not erase any of that, just like when our bodies, we experience things we never can really understand. I've had lots of conversations with people who, is it science? Is it mystical? I don't know. We are witnessing science in the same way the ancient Greeks might have shown devotion to Apollo and the oracle. We connect with the holy and the scientific. When we discover new life at the bottom of the ocean, or if we discover life out in the galaxy, how will that challenge our beliefs, our understanding of science and what is possible? And so I like to think about once upon a time, it's not always false. Once upon a time, there was a girl named Cecilia who fell in love with the universe. She felt her heart leap with joy every time she found out something new. She wanted to grow up and be an astronomer who studied the stars. Throughout her whole life, she studied and observed the stars, asking, what are stars made of? How were they born? Do they die? How do we know? Throughout her whole life, her heart sang with each discovery. She was a little girl who grew up in England, and she saw a meteorite blaze across the sky, just happenstance. And her mother taught her a small rhyme so she could remember what it was. As we're walking home that night, we saw a shining meteorite. She later told a friend that that moment, she knew she was going to grow up and be an astronomer. In those days, there were no women astronomers. She learned the names of all the constellations, the Big Dipper, Orion's belt, and she was very precise at remembering small details. By age 12, she learned how to measure things, do math problems. And once a week at her school, this is really cool, it reminds me of Montessori, they had 3 little brass tacks scattered around the school garden, and they had to find them with their eyes, luckily not with their feet. But she was always an observer, and this helped her go forward. In 1912, when she was a teenager, there was really no education for her. So she spent hours in a makeshift laboratory she called her chapel. She conducted a little worship service of her own in awe before the magnificence of the natural world. She pored over her family's library, and she found 2 lonely science books to study, one about plants and one about Sir Isaac Newton's observations about gravity. So luckily, Cecilia had the support of her family. She went to college to study botany because that was the only field of science permitted for women. Anyway, she was amazing, and she did well, and she loved physics. She eventually convinced Harvard University to take her on to study astronomy after she got her second major in physics. So she had a major in botany and then physics, and then she went on to Harvard University, and she figured out that stars are made of hydrogen. And in today's worlds of satellites and computers, we know this to be true. How can you possibly know what makes a star happen so far away? But Cecilia was the first person to ever get a PhD in astronomy, male or female. And her choice was not popular. People kept thinking that she was advanced for other reasons. They told her that she was wrong, but she was right. Stars are made out of hydrogen. How many times are scientists told that they're silly, like the law of gravity, or you can't do that because of who you are or what you believe? Once upon a time, on September 15th, 2021, at age 51, C.N. Proctor became the first Black woman to pilot a spacecraft, taking the controls of a SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft on its 3-day orbital flight. She was not a NASA astronaut, But as a member of a 4-person crew on the privately funded mission, she was able to do a lifelong dream. And she really didn't have any role models. She said she was already 22 when Mae Jemison became the first Black woman to fly in space in 1992. And Mae Jemison said, "Images show us possibilities. A lot of times fantasy is what gets us through to reality." And before 1992, Black girls and women saw themselves reflected mainly in like Star Trek. We think of Lieutenant Uhura, linguist and communications officer from the 23rd century starship Enterprise, who first appeared in 1966. She was depicted as a native Swahili speaker from the United States of Africa. Her character's name was derived from the Swahili word for freedom. So all that to say, how do we find freedom and imagination? How do we give that fire of thought legitimacy? And I think of the power that a place that permits voices, that permits free thought, where children can come experiment with instruments and say, "I believe in 1,000 gods. I do not believe in God. I believe in Jesus. I believe in Allah." And I've seen all of those in our religious exploration program. And I think, what will these children encounter? They're going to encounter skepticism and obstacles and so many things, but they have people in their life telling them, yes, you can do that. I know somebody that does that. And if we have those kind of role models in our lives, science, possibility, fulfilled lives are possible. I'm curious if you can think about a time when someone told you no. I was told, no, girls aren't ministers. No, girls can't do that, or whatever. I just remember going, yes, I can. Yes, I can. And thinking about the people in my life who told me I could. And oftentimes they were male mentors, and I'm grateful for that. It's all the people in our lives who support us into imagination. So I want to close with the idea that space is not the final frontier. The final frontier is our imagination. It's imagining what is possible as humans. Right now we face some of the most compelling problems of our time. When we think about war and climate change and so many things that, weigh heavy on our hearts, the need for peace in Gaza, the need for peace in Ukraine, so many things. How can we have imagination and support and work together to try and find solutions? So often people are like, no, you can't do that. Well, yeah, you can. That's how the United Nations happened. That's how many things happen. And if we can use our imagination, we might have a good chance of making it to see, whatever Star Trek Enterprise comes hanging out in our space. Or we might see that our own little children here invent cures for cancer and invent beautiful things. And thank you for being a space that allows that. Amen.